Hi everyone, a literal deep-fried Mars bar here with rhyme signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of making you question if Scotland actually deserves deep fat fryers or not. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new Obsidian Tide album, the Grand Crescendo. Now, I feel like I've been starved of some genuinely excellent progressive death metal this year. I mean, sure, we've had fantastic releases from bands like Rannoch, Ne Obliviscaris, and The World Is Quiet Here, but I've been craving some good old-fashioned Opeth-style jams. I've been wanting that nice blend between quiet, jazzy passages and having my face absolutely disintegrated for quite some time now, and I've found that 2023 simply hasn't packed enough of this into its runtime yet. In that respect then, I'm very grateful for Israel's Obsidian Tide, who appear to have answered my call and craving in the nick of time, as the Grand Crescendo, their second full-length studio album, is everything I've been looking for and more besides, with this record setting up this impressive trio of musicians as being 2023's ones to watch for me, with one of the best pure progressive death metal albums I've heard in quite some time, and scratches a familiar itch to that which last year's offering from an Abstract Illusion managed. So, who are Obsidian Tide? This is my first rodeo with the band, but they've been around for a little while now, getting their start in 2015 with debut EP Debris, and then their first full-length album Pillars of Creation in 2019. Now, 4 years later, the sophomore is here, and it's absolutely stunning. Managing to completely rule my free time over the past couple of weeks as I've been struggling to move on and listen to pretty much anything else, such is the power and replayability of this record. Consisting of Oz Avnia on guitars and clean vocals, Shachar Bieber on bass and growled vocals, and Erez Nadler on drums and programming, Obsidian Tide managed to make themselves feel like far more than a simple trio, echoing that marvellous trick that Rush exemplified so many years ago of sounding like there are so many more musicians involved in the music than just the three of them. Obsidian Tide do share far more in common with the likes of Opeth, though, than they do with Rush, but they manage to balance their time between the brutality of their death metal core and their creative progressive side. I can honestly say that this is probably the most accessible progressive death metal record I've ever listened to, and one I would immediately point out to people who've either been on the fence towards the genre or who've been put off by it entirely. The Grand Crescendo is a bulky 62 minutes in length across 7 tracks, the shortest of which is the outro song of Miracles, but if we're talking real songs, then the shortest clocks in at 8 minutes and 20 seconds and the longest at 13 minutes and 32 seconds. So this is a band who aren't really entertaining the idea of these shorter song structures that you might associate with typical traditional death metal, instead preferring to adopt the more expansive, long-form and self-indulgent patterns of progressive music. Now, this may or may not be your kind of thing. I'm assuming that if you're familiar with my channel and my tastes like at all, that you'll know that this is basically ambrosia for me. Short number of tracks plus long album length usually garners my attention. It would be easy to assume that due to these song lengths here that there might be a certain inaccessibility to this album, or that it is a difficult one to appreciate on face value with little immediacy, requiring the sort of dozen or so spins that these kind of thick boy albums often demand. But nothing could be further from the truth. Despite how unscalable this album might appear on a surface level, I found the music to be contained within absolutely addictive, with some of the most brazenly impressive guitar work, infectious melodies, and memorable musical passages and interludes I've listened to all year, and I have listened to one heck of a lot of music in 2023. The record starts off with the alliterative Clandestine Calamities, a progressive metal name if ever there was one, and I am immediately impressed. Oz Avnia's haunting, beautiful clean vocals draw you in before Shachar Bieber's warm, thick bass tone left hooks you almost immediately, drawing comparisons in tone and warmth to bands like Vola and making me feel right at home with this one. The track continues nicely with some excellent woodwind work to undercut the powerful guitars before we start gradually building into these grand Opethian guitars from Avnia and Nadler's drums really evoking that old school Mendez feeling. Then Bieber comes in hard with one of the most powerful and immediate growled tones I've heard in years. It's so strong and commanding, it absolutely took my breath away when I first heard it. Avnia continues to impress on the axe work, managing to find the perfect balance between intensity and melody, giving me cause to, damage my aging neck muscles a bit, before finally the band relax a little, segueing into a beautiful, down-tempo, jazzy interlude at the midway point, which once again speaks to me of classic early 2000s Opeth, giving me kind of Ghost Reveries and Watershed vibes. It's a fantastic opening track, but honestly this is only the beginning, as the band are about to really start flexing what they're actually capable of. Beyond is the second track on the album, and definitely one of my favourites that I keep returning to. The atmospherics on the early parts of this song really do conjure up the imagery of the album art. Huge, monstrous, crushing waves in a darkened and lonely ocean batter you relentlessly. The guitars here are really something else and carry the body of this track so impeccably. Avnia may not be the most technical of death metal guitarists I've ever heard, but his application and knowledge of melody and atmosphere is enviable and amongst the best I've heard in quite some time. There's this dark, melancholic moodiness to the compositions here that works so beautifully, painting a picture of a dark night sky with rolling clouds covering the distant twinkling starlight, while flashes of lightning and squalls of torrential rain come to drench the listener in between these haunting melodies. As I said earlier, it's how well Obsidian Tide balances the time spent between the light and dark that makes this such a fascinating listen, and especially when the two styles butt heads, with both Avnia and Bieber dueling against each other on vocal duties, which is demonstrated brilliantly on this song. Third track, The Invasion on Paradise, is a fascinating one, immediately slowing things down on the pacing, but not inappropriately so. If anything, after the intensity of the previous two songs, it's nice to take a bit of a breather and enjoy the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore that this song provides. Avnia once again demonstrates that less is more, with his excellent and sombre guitar work, never working in more than the song needs, but keeping my interest in the playing with tasteful flourishes here and there when needed. Around 3 minutes in, the pace kicks up into gear once more as Bieber's menacing throaty growls rise up from under the surface, adding texture and a necessary bite back to the album. I can't state enough just how much like classic old Opeth these guys keep going into, but managing to sound less like a copy and more like a continuation of what the band was doing before Heritage threw us all a curveball. I would easily say that The Invasion on Paradise, and heck, the whole album really, feels like it's the branching timeline album from Opeth. This is what we would have got after Watershed if the band had decided to stick to the more traditional progressive death metal route rather than the direction they did go in. And unlike Orcrust's debut album from earlier this year, Obsidian Tide have managed to find that balance between being inspired by and straight up emulating another band rather beautifully. There's definitely moments on this record that do sound exactly like Opeth, but nothing that sounds like it was directly lifted from them, only crafted from the same cloth but by very different hands. Fourth track is the very heavy metal Halo Crusher, even replacing the U in Crusher with a V, you roguish devils you. It is straight up one of the heaviest and most immediate songs on the album, batting out the park with one of the catchiest, most groove-laden riffs I've heard in months, and it's definitely something I've been humming absent-mindedly for the couple of weeks I've spent with this record now. But we are given a chance to recover our neck muscles, thank God, as Obsidian Tide play their trick card of the light and shade once more. But it doesn't last long, as we are swiftly thrown back and forth to the merciless onslaught of Bieber's vocals before whiplashing back to another sequence of softened darkness with some typically sinister death metal lyrics. The Undying Flames is the second longest song on the album, and right from the get-go I'm reminded of late 90s to early 2000s Porcupine Tree, which only makes me wonder further if this is what could have happened with Ackerfeld and Wilson's collaborative album Storm Corrosion. The bass tone on this song is gorgeous, a warm, molasses-like thick vibe that really struck a chord with me, showcasing Bieber as one of the more interesting low-end players of the 2020s easily. We even have time for some old-school 70s sounding keyboards here, which really helps to give this song a more timeless and proggy feeling, and further cements in my head that Obsidian Tide are doing what I really wish Opeth would have done. I'm just grateful at this point that this band exists in order to fulfill that deepest, darkest wish of mine, because Lord knows Ackerfeld ain't going to be doing it anymore. The soloing from Avnia in the latter half of this song is honestly just jaw-dropping, and worth the price of entry alone. Once again though, it's not about technical showiness, as it is perfectly placed melody and crafting something that feels non-standard and interesting, resulting in a sequence that's endlessly compelling, relying on lines that are mesmerising instead of flashy. And at last we come to the final song of the Field of Reeds, and if you've ever listened to any progressive metal before, you know that the goods are always saved until the final curtain, and this track is no exception. Consisting of the main 13.5 minute long song and the nearly 3-minute outro Miracles, the 4-part long The Field of Reeds is one of the best prog mini-epics of the year, and I will die on that statement if I have to. I've replayed this song more times than almost anything else this year. Something about the immediacy of the intro that segues into the gorgeous jazzy section that follows up with the haunting, beautiful flute solo that dances like starlight above the rest of the instrumentation is absolutely captivating to me. I feel like as soon as I start this song, then that is it. I'm in its thrall for the duration. The vocals, lyrics, compositions and instrumentation, all incredible. And there's a certain feeling of the best of Neoblivis Scaris to when Bieber comes crashing in at around 4 minutes, giving a similar feeling of gravity and weight to when Xenoear barges into the mix over Tim Charles on Australia's finest progressive death metal band. The feeling of climactic certainty to the album is one of my favourite aspects of this song. It feels rewarding, like the band are thanking you for your time spent with them by unleashing their full potential in one concentrated blast. The guitars, sublime. The bass, incredible. The drums, thundering. Add then on top of that the best overall vocal performances from a record that's already had several dozen moments that have caused me to yelp out loud. It is impossible for me to not love this song. It almost feels tailor-made for my ears alone, because it just contains everything I could love from a progressive death metal song. The way it all bleeds down into the final outro of Miracles is wonderful, feeling like the band are starting to pack away all their gear and get ready to head out into the great wide blue yonder. It's introspective and delicate, and honestly the perfect winding down session after the onslaught of emotional intensity from the song that it plays down off. I honestly have very few criticisms or complaints to levy against the Grand Crescendo. Okay, maybe it's a tiny bit derivative of its influences, but as I've said earlier, this feels like a natural evolution of the sound they've taken inspiration from rather than a direct uncreative copy. The blood of Opeth is clearly here, but Obsidian Tide have taken the same palette and colours and given us something that is still true to themselves whilst feeling intimately familiar and warm at the same time. So, what else can I say about Obsidian Tide's The Grand Crescendo? This is easily one of the best progressive death metal albums I've heard in the 2020s and easily stands toe-to-toe with the best in the biz. It's a grand, epic, thoughtful album. It's expertly crafted, beautifully paced, and at times it's impossible to believe that this is the work of only 3 guys. I've been listening to this one somewhat obsessively for the last couple of weeks, and I keep finding new things that I hadn't heard the previous run. Keep finding a greater appreciation for the little details and the amount of love and care that's clearly been poured into this album. I can't get enough of this, and it's been distracting me from getting other albums reviewed, which is in a way one of the best compliments I can give a record. Please do not sleep on this one. If you've never been much of a fan of death metal, I believe there's still enough going on here that might be capable of swaying you to its charms. And if you're already a fan, then there's no excuse. Stop what you're doing right now and go and check out what I consider to be an easy album of the year contender. Recommendation is, of course, to grab this in physical format. There is no way this deserves anything less than pride of place in your collection. This album really is the complete package, and Obsidian Tide deserve all of the amazing things that are sure to come their way with this release. This is all, of course, my opinion, as you know, so if you have listened to the Grand Crescendo, please tell me what you thought of this record in the comments down below. If you did like this video, please do share it around with anyone else who you think would possibly enjoy it, and do please consider subscribing to the channel for more content. I'm going to leave my link tree as always down below, where you'll find all the places to find me on social media, as well as a link to my Ko-fi page if you're feeling particularly generous and want to help support the channel. But until next time guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures extremely odd.